Speaking. What are the qualities of a great speaker? I think when I first started in the summer of 2004, I thought passion and enthusiasm were everything. And I still believe that they are the most important things that a speaker has. However, I guess after thousands of speech over the years for hundreds of clients, I've come to a different place. I have a deeper appreciation of the art and skill of a speaker, and I think I'm much better at it than I used to be. But interestingly, in the summer of 2009, I started developing two very specific problems. The first problem, I guess all speakers have at a certain point in their lives, is when all their clients come to them and say, you know what, we love what you do, we've heard it many times, but now we need to hear something different. Problem number two, simultaneous problem, was that I actually had too much to say now during the course of 1 hour. I'd learned so much about risk-taking and decision-making, not least from the clients that I've been working with over those years, that I just couldn't cram it all in to a keynote speech. Great for a 3-hour seminar or a day-long workshop, but not so good for a 1-hour presentation. Fortunately, the two problems were to come together to solve themselves, because now I was able to create 8 brand new speeches, not just about my core subjects, risk-taking and decision-making, but what is it to be a decisive leader? What is it to motivate and persuade other people to make the kinds of decisions that you want them to make? How do organisations embrace uncertainty for the best? How do they innovate and embrace new ideas? How to use our intuition to make the best possible decisions, and perhaps most interestingly of all, how to embrace that invisible force called luck in order to drive us to the highest possible achievements in life. What was interesting for me was that having to create new material presented a new challenge, because my old speech had actually evolved over a period of time, many years of feedback and iteration, and now I had to create something new from scratch. But that made me question what it was to be a great speaker and the qualities of a great speech. And that's what I'd like to share with you now. The first quality for me is still passion. I'm very, very lucky in my job. I get to hear a lot of other speakers, usually on the same stage as I'm speaking, and certainly the quality that unites all of the best ones is that they're passionate, they're enthusiastic, they care about what they're saying. If I don't care about what I'm saying, why on earth would any of your people care either? For me, passion and enthusiasm is definitely still where it all starts, but no longer where it stops. The second quality of a great speech, though, perhaps slightly more importantly, is that the information that you're imparting needs to be relevant and new and interesting and important. In fact, it should be educational. It should improve the way that they do their business or the way that they lead their broader lives. The information itself should be stimulating, it should be imaginative, it should be inventive, and it should be information that people want to embrace and take on. If it doesn't have some sort of impact on the bottom line, then ultimately I think we've got to ask ourselves, why are we delivering it? The second quality of a great speaker is definitely that they're educational. Thirdly, a speech needs to make people feel good about where they are. It needs to have some degree of humour. Always start with a joke, they say. Now, I don't think that Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi were well known for their gags, but for those of us that aren't in their league, using jokes and humour is a great way of making people feel good about where they are, about listening to you, about being there, about being in your company, about taking on what you're talking about. Because if people are laughing and feeling good in the room, then people are much more likely and predisposed to do what you're advocating that they do afterwards. Humour, for me, is a really important element. The next characteristic of a great speech, which I always try and bring into my work, is, of course, story. Great speeches contain great stories. It's impossible to overestimate the importance of story. It is, if you like, the native format of the brain. We know this because when the brain is allowed to run riot, when left to its own devices, i.e. when we sleep, how does it think? It thinks in terms of narratives or stories or what we call dreams. Stories are always the most memorable part of any speech, and I think if a picture is worth 1,000 words, well then a story is definitely worth 1,000 facts when it comes to persuading, motivating and inspiring people to think, to feel or act just a little bit differently as a result of hearing the speech. The stories are the parts that make people laugh, the stories are the parts that make people cry, they're the stories that connect with people emotionally, and it's been a great pleasure for me to bring the art of storytelling that I learned as a screenwriter into the act of speech writing. Great stories make great speeches, and I think that has to be one of the most important aspects of any speech. The next rather technical element of a great speech is constant editing. Don't get me wrong, I admire speakers who write a new speech every single time they talk to an audience. I think that's one way to go. But what I'm trying to do is create an hour-long experience that is honed over a period of time. Every single time I speak to an audience, that speech is already the product of a first draft, a second draft, a third draft which never see the light of day, a fourth draft which I show to my friends and colleagues and agents, and then, and only then, do I start presenting it to audiences. And then once I start to get audience feedback, it gets better still. Editing is perhaps the most important discipline that a great speaker has. Finally though, bringing all this together, a great speech should do something much more than just educate and entertain and inform. It is no good bringing all your people together to have a good time and listen to something no matter how interesting it is. Ultimately, if they don't change what they do, it's all been for nothing. And therefore the final element of a great speech is a great climax. A climax that is inspirational and motivational. A climax that will change the way that people think but also feel, so that they want to leave that room and do things just a little bit differently. Because if they don't, the rest of it has all been for nothing. So, passion, education, humour, structure, constant editing, and an awesome climax. These are the characteristics of a great speech.